So number one here, we're going to make this a closed endpoint, and my other one an open endpoint. You're drawing those on there. Can you tell me the parent function of this graph? Y equals x. Okay, that would be my equation. What's its name? What is it? What kind of function? Linear. Okay. So you have a linear function. And in my world, I'm going to say big P of x means it's a parent function. And from yesterday, what kind of notation is that? Normally it's an F there. Say it again.
Parent notation.
What kind of notation did we go over yesterday if that would have been an X? Function notation. P of x, F of x, G of x, H of x. Function notation. Your parent function, the graph, is going to go through 0, 0, and it's got a slope of 1. So that is your parent function for a linear equation. Stuff you need to know for your test. So for this line here, if I want to write the domain, we're going from left to right. What is the domain of that line? Where does it start on the left? -5. Where does it end on the right? +5. So tell me, using inequalities, what to write down.
-5 less than or equal to x less than or equal to 5.
Good. Oh, thank you. Why?
Because it's an open.
It's an open point. Okay. So then we have our range. What's going to be my range? You can round to the nearest tenth. Okay, range, low to high. What's the lowest part of that graph? It's at about where? -1, or we're going to say -0.5. Okay. Where is the highest part of that graph? 2.5. Okay. So I would have -1/2 less than y less than or equal to 2/2 or 2.5 or 5/2. So we have an open point, we have less than and less than, we had a closed point, we had less than or equal to. For this graph over here, we're not going to add any endpoints. Okay? You still have a linear function. So your equation would be f of x equals x, y equals x, p of x equals x, something like that. One of those. Your graph goes through 0, 0 with a slope of 1. So over here, even though this line had a negative slope, your parent function is still the equation y equals x, because your parent functions are not going to be negative. So I didn't put endpoints here. Since it doesn't have endpoints, where does it start? On the y-axis? Not quite. What's the furthest left part of that graph? Everybody mumbled at the same time. Is it like -1.8? Is that the furthest left part of that graph? Well, it is on that picture, but that's not the furthest left part. So we don't exactly know where it's starting. Okay? Do I know where it's ending? So when you have a case like that, we don't know where it starts and we don't know where it stops. You have infinities. Okay? So I don't know where it starts, but it starts somewhere way out there on the left. So I'm going to write these in interval notation. INT. So it's starting somewhere way out there on the left, And way out there on the left, somewhere, is negative infinity. Where does it stop on the right? Positive infinity. If you are going to write the infinity signs, do not use an inequality. Okay? If you're going to use an infinity sign, you are writing an interval notation. Don't use the inequalities. It looks funny, and it's not right. Okay? So that is the interval for your domain. What would be the interval for your range? Where does it start on the bottom?
Negative infinity.
Negative infinity. Where does it end? At the top. Positive infinity. So the same thing. We're going from negative infinity to positive infinity. Talk about that in a little bit. So now on number 3, we're going to put a point, a closed point, down at the bottom of that graph. And I'm going to write it in both notations. If I want to write the domain for this linear equation, what would my domain be using inequalities?
Negative 1 upon infinity.
We're not, okay, I said inequalities. So what does that mean you're not going to use?
Not infinity.
Not infinity.
Yeah.
Say it again. You said the same thing he did. Okay. It does go on forever, but we're not going to write infinities because we're going to use inequalities. So what I'm going to say is that its x values greater than or equal to, we're going to call it negative 1/2. So everything greater than negative 1/2, which technically will go to infinity, but we don't write it. Okay? If I wanted to write it with the infinity sign, then I would have bracket negative 1/2 to infinity. You should never have a negative infinity. I say never. Hopefully you never have a negative infinity on the right-hand side. It's negative. It's on the left. What would I write for the range?
Negative 5. Y greater than or equal to negative 5.
Okay, y greater than or equal to negative 5. That's the inequality. What would be the interval notation? Negative 5 to infinity.